Broadcasting from the Unshackled Studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello everybody and welcome back to WilmsFront on this Anzac Day Eve, Thursday the 24th of April 2025. We are live on the WilmsFront YouTube channel, the WilmsFront Rumble channel and my WilmsFront X account. It is 7:30 p.m. here in Melbourne, Victoria. It is 9 days to go until Election Day on Saturday the 3rd of May. Early voting commenced on Tuesday, but as I've previously stated to all of my followers and viewers, I'm not in favour of early voting. I urge you to all vote on the day, so your vote is counted that night in the same polling booth. As a Victorian voter on WilmsFront during this election campaign, I featured the lead Senate candidates from the Conservative, Freedom, minor parties. If one of them is elected to the Senate, although they'll be representing Victoria, they'll be voting on federal legislation that affects all Australians. Joining me on this WilmsFront as my guest is the Libertarian lead Victorian Senate candidate, Jordan Dittloff, fresh from his latest minor party Senate candidates debate on the opposition podcast last night with Bernie Finn from Family First and Warren Pickering from One Nation, who I've recently interviewed. So Jordan, you're perfecting my trifecta of candidate guests.
I'm glad you could collect them all.
Now, the one that you did on the opposition podcast last night, there's no buzzer tonight, so you don't have to worry about that. I'm not sure.
Well, that's right. I think Alvy missed it a lot of the time as well, so I don't think.
I'm not sure if you're hearing that in your sleep last night.
Mate, I'm ex-hospitality. I hear buzzers and alarms and stuff that from work all the time in my dreams. So.
And you also previously took part in the 6 News Victorian Senate debate. That Bernie Finn wasn't in that, but Fiona Patten, who's running for legalised cannabis, and Jordan van der Lam, or his real name is Jordan van der Berg, from the Victorian Socialists. That was, how did you find that going up against the...
Well, it's funny because I'll be honest, and this might seem a strange thing to say, I actually have more respect for Jordan from the Victorian Socialists than I do for a lot of the competition I'm facing in this Senate run. While I obviously stridently disagree with his principles and his ideology, at least he has principles and ideology. And I think the biggest highlight of that debate for me on 6 News was the opportunity to put Fiona Patten under a bit of fire and cross-examination in respect of her involvement in pandemic legislation and being a pivotal vote where one vote would have made a difference in Victoria in 2021. So she didn't like being asked that question and it was all smiles until I sort of put one between her eyes, metaphorically speaking. And if anyone wants to watch that clip, we've got that in our feed. Maybe we'll link to it in the X sort of post from this live stream afterwards. But it was I think very satisfying, and I think a lot of Victorians wanted to answer those questions.
Jordan van der Lam, his answers reminded me of that Lenin statue, body of Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, I should say, that comes to life in that Simpsons episode.
Yeah, must destroy capitalism. Yeah.
That's basically what all his answers
look, the problem is, right, and I said this right from the beginning, I've said to my campaign team a couple of times, the worst part about the socialists is they can't laugh at themselves and they can't ever allow themselves to break out of that cult mentality that they have to shun you. I had a really, really funny experience yesterday at the seat of Wills and pre-poll there, which is deep in the socialist Greens heartland of northern Melbourne in Brunswick. And you had the socialists going up and down the queue of people waiting for a vote, sort of like, pressing these socialist how to votes into their hands. And this young, well, he wouldn't be that young. He might be maybe 5 years younger than me. Guy wearing a keffiyeh and the black socialist shirt. He sort of almost like fronted me, grabbed me almost, and he's like, "Oh, Jordan, do you remember me? And I'm like, no, I don't know. I apparently had this debate with him back in my Young Liberal days at Deakin when I was in the Deakin Uni Liberal Club, and he was in Young Labor at the time. And obviously it made a mark on him, and he remembered, and he obviously had seen that I was running for the Senate, and sort of he obviously had this, oh, I know that guy. And it was this really human sort of this really human moment where he said, like, oh, do you remember me? And I said, oh yeah, there you go. And I said, how are you going? And it was almost as though for a moment he'd sort of broken out of this socialist robot cult and had a human interaction. And then he realized that all of his comrades were sort of like looking at him and kind of judging him and going, why are you talking to this capitalist pig? And then he was like, oh, nothing. And then sort of like walked off. It was just like they're really a cult. And I think deep down there's still human beings that we can save, but maybe not before the revolution.
Are you able to, we've got Dave in the comments, flip Jordan's video, because you're on, go to your video settings because you're
mirrored,
on, yeah, your camera's
right,
mirrored.
Right.
Restream for some reason does that automatically. There we go.
There we are.
See the shirt, I am Libertarian, clearly.
Yes.
in
Indeed. Lest I'm
English.
confused. I have to, this is my, reminder when I'm going into the deep, dark depths of socialist Melbourne. But no, look, the news is not all dark. There are plenty of areas of Melbourne where there's hope and a lot of people looking for alternatives to the major parties. And a lot of those areas are traditionally Labor voting areas that voted no in the Voice referendum, that don't feel like Albanese is representing them. They're disappointed with the Albanese government, but they don't trust the Liberals. And they're really looking for an alternative. And for many of those voters, the Libertarians are a really appealing option.
Well, I can vote for you in the Senate, but I can't vote for the Libertarians in my seat of Dunkley. I sort of had a half thought when I saw there was no Libertarian candidate on the ballot. Should I put my hand up again to run for Dunkley like I did for the Liberal Democrats in 2016? So you're not running in all the seats.
No. So look, our position is this, that unlike Family First and One Nation, who have essentially on paper running everywhere, but as Joel Jamal was saying the other day when I was talking to him, at least half from both parties are ghosts. They're not real candidates. They're not people that you can go and talk to in the street, and they're not people with a profile in the community. Many of them aren't from the community. Trump for Patriots is probably even worse. And at the end of the day, we care more about running real candidates. Any candidate that we've got on the ballot is a real person that we would be happy to be a member of parliament and that represents their community and the branch structure that we've got in place. So over time, those numbers will grow and we'll be fielding more and more candidates each election. But we went for quality over quantity. And as you said, all Victorians can vote one Libertarian in the Senate, regardless of whether you've got a lower house candidate or not. And a lot of our campaigning has been really focused on that. We've also got billboards and paid social media ads that are running now through until the election. They've been running for the last week or so, and really focusing on that option to vote Libertarian on the white ballot paper.
All I've been seeing on the freeways is Trumpet of Patriots.
Yeah, but it's funny because, what are those ads really saying to people other than that Clive has a lot of money and likes Clive? And you've got these little white text checklists, that it's sort of, it's almost this exercise in, this sort of orgy of expenditure. But my suspicion is that I don't think it will yield the same returns as it did. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens.
Well, the Libertarian and you yourself got some publicity on the national broadcaster last night. I'll bring it up on the stream. The battle for Kooyong, and this sort of came out of left field, this question to Amelia Hamer. And so you've got a candidate in Kooyong, and
so Richard Peppard is an actual doctor, unlike Monique Ryan. He's a neurologist, and he's excellent. And neither Richard nor I were contacted.
Oh, to be fair, Monique Ryan is an actual medical doctor as well.
Yes. But basically, our party's policy platform and elements of my past were essentially used as an attack vector against Amelia Hamer because they've preferenced the Libertarians number 2 in Kooyong. And the worst, most extreme thing the ABC could think of would be that a party wants to abolish net zero renewable energy targets and abolish the Federal Department of Education and abolish publicly funded childcare subsidies, which is basically middle-class welfare. So, of course, for the ABC, that's a source of pearl-clutching horror. But, I don't think they realised they were actually signal boosting what many of our supporters or people who would like to vote for those kind of policies would think were quite reasonable responses to cost of living crisis.
Well, the extreme policies, according to the ABC, because it would put them out of a job.
I was disappointed but not surprised that they didn't choose our extreme policy of defund the ABC to put in their article, although that would have been very funny.
As they say when it comes to the gravy train, always back the horse named self-interest.
Yes, indeed.
And I'm not sure if you saw this in the Age today. I did see
that. Yeah,
but you didn't feature on their photo. So they've got Clive Palmer is not running in Victoria, neither is Fatima Payman, because the West Australian senator, but they got Bernie Finn, Jordan Vanderlam, and Fiona Patton, and it goes. Well, this is on the ballot order.
Yes.
So it has a brief blurb about lower taxes and civil liberties, repealing 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act and enshrining free speech in the Constitution, and then also goes into your criminal history, which I guess we should go to that next because it's the elephant in the room. Hi, Jordan. Do any other Libertarian candidates also boast fraud and drug convictions, or is it just you?
No, that would be unique to my past.
I think Flynn is the same person on X who replied to my interview with you at the free speech rally.
Yeah, indeed.
Did you watch your wallet while you were interviewing him?
Yeah. Flynn's obviously got a bit of extra time and mental space to devote to me, and more power to them. I hope I live rent-free in your head, Flynn. So my past is something that I've never resolved from or hidden from. And fortunately, most Victorians don't view the worst mistakes or the worst things you've ever done in your past as the summary of who you are and something that should define you or damn you forever. Most Victorians, both in my life since those events and during my political candidacy, respond to that information really positively. They appreciate the honesty and disclosure, and they're really happy to see that I've learned lessons and I've taken steps to turn my life around. So at the end of the day, our founding fathers in 1901, when the country was being founded and the Constitution was being drafted, they intentionally made sure that a criminal record wasn't preclusive, that you weren't imposing eternal punishment.
Sorry to interrupt, let's just go to the Constitution here, yes. Section 44, disqualification.
Yeah.
So
you want to zoom in on it just a little bit?
Yeah.
I'll try not to bore people with the constitutional niceties, but basically it says that the relevant points is section 44.2 says if you have been convicted and under sentence, so that means if you're serving a term of imprisonment or a period of your sentence in the community like parole, or subject to be sentenced. So that means if you've been found guilty of an offence but you haven't yet been sentenced for an offence punishable by 1 year or longer, which means basically an indictable offence. But the crucial word here is "and" is under sentence, and that word essentially means that once your sentence is finished, so you've been sentenced, you've served your sentence, you are no longer disqualified for the purposes of section 44.2, and that wasn't happenstance. When the first drafts of the Constitution were produced in the constitutional debates, they originally had a provision that would have been preclusive forever. And Samuel Griffiths, who's a real towering figure of early constitutional law and one of our great founding fathers, one of our first High Court judges, he stood up in the convention debates and he said, "Gentlemen, need I remind you that half of us are considered rebels to Irish Home Rule by the British?" And basically said that, this nation actually was founded by people who had made mistakes or who had been deemed to have been guilty of criminal past, and that they felt that a free press and a robust press in New South Wales and Victoria at the time would do a good job of making sure that anyone who claimed to be rehabilitated actually was. And that's certainly been my experience. So at the end of the day, not everyone, and it certainly sounds like I'm not getting Flynn's vote, and that's okay. Not everyone is going to believe that I've either done enough, or that even if I have done enough, that my past makes me someone who shouldn't be voted for or who shouldn't be in office. But that certainly hasn't been my experience of the vast majority of Victorians, either during this campaign or in the time since I got out of prison. I've been really fortunate to have a lot of people give me a lot of opportunity and trust, and I've been able to repay that to those people who gave me opportunities, and also to victims of my criminal past. So I've repaid over $40,000 to victims so far, so it's over 15% of what's owed. And whatever happens at this election, win, lose or draw, I'm going to continue repaying those monies and make good on my debts as I committed to. So, I think my biggest lessons that I took from those events, and in summary, it was a culmination of drug-related offending informed by drug and alcohol addiction, and also theft, white-collar offending relating to a former travel agency business that I ran. And the lessons that I've learned from that is really, first and foremost, the cost of kicking hard decisions down the road. Very rarely in life, if ever, do things get better by ignoring them or putting your head in the sand. And I can see that on many really important areas of policy federally, we are led by people, or sought to be led by people in the case of the opposition, who really are pretty content to kick the can down the road and avoid making hard decisions.
Now, you and I, we actually knew each other over a decade ago. When I told somebody this at the free speech rally, they said, "Oh, were you in jail with Jordan?" It's like, no.
No, we knew each other back in the young Liberal days.
Oh, well, I wasn't.
Well, no, you weren't. You
Yes.
weren't. You were still in the Liberal Democrats at that time. But yeah, I was sort of always adjacent to the Liberty movement. I always sort of knew I was a Libertarian. I always knew that. I think at that point, in sort of 2013, 2014, I even kind of thought of myself or referred to myself as a Libertarian within the Liberal Party. But it was that old trope of you can change it from within, and it's a broad church, and all the things that you say. When
we'll get to that.
Yeah, sure.
I'm curious, in prison, did you come across the former Victorian Liberal Party director, Damien Mantak, who stole $1.5 million from the party and got 5 years in prison?
Yeah, so Damien was a friend of mine before those events, and I kept in touch with him. We never did time together in the same place, but I kept in touch with him by written correspondence, and we sort of supported each other through that time because it was a fairly similar experience we'd had. And Damien's someone that I still consider a friend. I've caught up with him a number of times since he's gotten out, and I'm confident Damien's got a positive contribution to make to society in future.
Though he did in 2014 kick your friend Scott Harrison out of the Liberal Party for being an ex-Nazi. He's not a Nazi anymore, but kicked him out based on his history. I'm not sure if you're still in touch with Scott. I know.
Yeah, Scott's my best friend. So yeah. So Scott,
you're still, and he supported you, well, visited you, but he was of the view that you certainly deserved your punishment, and he's in the Libertarian Party now as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, look, and I think that when your life unravels, as mine did, as a result of the poor decisions I made and the mistakes I made, which I completely own, you do realize who is there in your life as a true friend, and who is going to be there for you when you can't give anyone anything or do anything for anyone, when you're at your lowest ebb. And when you're sort of at rock bottom, the people that are still there to support you at that time are people that you can really count on and build a new life around.
Now, Flynn's got another comment. He says, "I'm not suggesting you can never work again, just that you're not a fit and proper person to be anywhere near power or taxpayer funds." And it might be shared by other people who like the Libertarian Party and want to vote for you. But of course, Canberra, we hear about, well, federal and state MPs rorting expenses. There was most recently Joe Halen, the New South Wales Transport Minister, who got a taxpayer-funded driver to drive her and her friends up for a piss up in the Hunter Valley. And, well, there's lots of alcohol in Parliament House. The
sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Yeah.
Yes.
It's an environment.
Wrote in the
late
inquiries about joints being shared around the Parliament, and that's not even getting started on the what goes on in the prayer room in Parliament House. But the point I'm making is that there'd be some people who you're abstinent from alcohol.
That's right.
As well now.
Yes.
That they're sort of worried that you could be recidivist in that's.
Yeah.
Of course, you would know just how bad Canberra is in terms of.
Yeah, it's an environment where a lot of people, both public servants and politicians, act the way that many people would act if they were out of the public eye, and where there wasn't a lot of scrutiny. And it's almost like a sort of year 9, year 10 school camp vibe a lot of the time. The way that politicians' accommodations work in Canberra, often they're living in share houses, like it's like a real frat party sort of atmosphere, co-ed sort of two-sex frat party sort of environment. But I think that a lot of people who become politicians have never really had any life experience before that. They are basically sort of newborn babes in this risk and opportunity rich environment. And I think someone with my past who understands, all right, Flynn, well, if you're just going to ask those questions and fuck off, that's fine. But, you're a piece of shit. So if basically you have people who haven't had those experiences, then they're not going to know what they would do if they were tested by them. Whereas someone like me, I know myself, I know my good and bad and everything in between. And I've learned more about myself than a lot of people ever do. And certainly at age 38, I think that I've got a lot more self-awareness and a lot more insight into, the things that make me tick and the things that are important. So basically, some of those things include like physical exercise is really important for me. As you say, I'm completely abstinent from all drugs and alcohol. But basically, I know the things I need to do, whether it be 12-step fellowship programs, whether it be other supports, physical fitness, all those kinds of things. And I'm much, much better at sensing when something is going in a particular direction than a lot of people are. Like, bad decisions typically don't just happen at the culminating bad decision. Bad decisions very often are lots of small, bad or risky decisions that you don't notice until you're in the big decision that gets you in trouble. And I think that's something I'm very aware of as well. Like, I can sense when something's going in a bad direction. I know when to leave a social gathering or a party or whatever before things start to get too alcohol oriented or before things start getting passed around. I'm very, very adept at navigating all those things and maintaining and protecting my sobriety. So I think that someone who has actually had a lot of skin taken off, who has, made mistakes, has a bit of scar tissue, has tried and failed and learned, that is, I think, really important and a really valuable component of my past experience.
Now, this is the first federal election where the Libertarian Party is called the Libertarian Party. The previous Morrison government passed legislation that, because they registered as the Liberal Party first in 1944, then nobody else can use that name. So the party was forced to change its name from the Liberal Democrats and settled on the Libertarian Party. Now, obviously, we won't know what the brand recognition or support will be until election night, but it was disappointing. You would say that the Western Australian result, only 0.64% of the vote, in the upper house 9,000 votes,
Yes.
a quarter of a quota, dead last amongst the groups in the upper house, and also in Victoria, the Paran by-election where your candidate Mark Desau,
Yes.
I only got 0.9% of the vote and 292 votes.
Yeah, so look, I'm happy to address both of those, and for their own reasons, each had factors that led to that. So in the case of the Paran by-election, basically we ran Mark as a candidate as a member of the Jewish community who opposed the social cohesion laws that were proposed at that time, which have now passed with the support of the Greens. But at the time, the Liberal Party had just come out as opposing them. I think at the beginning of the Paran by-election, the Liberal Party still had maintained their original position, and then during the course of that Paran campaign actually announced their opposition to those laws. So Paran was very much a strategic decision to contest. Paran is certainly not the heartland of the Libertarian Party or even the Liberal Democrats as we were then. We've never gotten great results there, and we weren't in that by-election to really pick up votes. We were there as a visibility exercise and as a strategic exercise on that policy issue. And it was resourced accordingly, and the result wasn't in any way out of the ordinary or anything that we were surprised by or disappointed by. And it shouldn't be anything as a state by-election in one of the most socialist seats in southern Melbourne. It shouldn't be a surprise or a concern to anybody as a result, and I'm certainly not concerned by it. With regards to the Western Australian election, I did have higher hopes there, but ultimately time was our biggest enemy. The rules that prohibited or the rules that changed the process of party registration deregistered our party in Western Australia when they were brought in, as with many other parties. And to re-register a party, you need to basically get 500 not only names on a list, but you have to get 500 signed forms, and there's a lot of a hurdle to actually jump over in WA to get re-registered, which the Labor government at the time basically used as a way of trying to sort of suppress political competition. So by the time we were re-registered, by the time we'd endorsed a candidate, it was about a month before Christmas, and then that election took place in March. So in terms of mobilising candidates, in terms of resources, I don't think there were any lower house candidates run in WA. So we had an upper house ticket, and it was basically an upper house only campaign. So unlike here in Victoria, where we've got about 50% of the seats covered, plus Broadbent in Monash is handing out our Senate How to Votes, which we can talk about if you like separately.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. So basically, we've got a hybrid model here in Victoria, as we do in New South Wales, who don't have every seat contested either. But more importantly here, we've had the value of time. I've been campaigning now for 13 months, furiously. A mixture of traditional campaigning in the community and also long-form conversations like this, X Spaces, really engaging with people both online and in the community, and also fundraising very effectively. And you'll see that with the billboards that are all around the state, the paid social media advertising that we've been doing the last week and for the next week and a bit. Essentially no stone has been unturned for this federal campaign here in Victoria. So whatever the result we get on May 3rd, win, lose or draw, I'll know that it was the best result we could have gotten. And I certainly couldn't say that for the WA election.
Your candidates, not just here in Victoria, but in New South Wales as well, are very active on all social media. But of course, I follow them all, so they turn up in my feed first, which it's not the same if somebody likes footy or is their primary. But my point is that all your candidates are giving it their best shot as well.
Yeah, exactly right. And at the end of the day, I think the biggest difference between us and parties like One Nation or Trumpeter Patriots or even Family First is that we have a really active branch structure. Our state divisions are very empowered and decentralised. Branches meet monthly, and all around Victoria, at least once a week, you can find your way to a branch meeting, break bread with like-minded, freedom-loving folk. And essentially, we're moving the needle and we're building grassroots momentum in the community in between elections. It's not just at election time we sort of ring people up and ask them to help us. It's a community and it's a genuine grassroots movement. We contested local government elections here in Victoria very effectively. We got 5 councillors elected. In Victoria, that's not as clear because there's not party alignment.
Yeah, it's the whole
system.
system is designed so basically voters are tricked on their mail-in ballot to vote for the Labor candidate.
Yeah, essentially, that's right. Yeah. So, but my point is that we did well in local government elections here in Vic and in New South Wales. We've got a state MP in New South Wales and in Victoria as well. And so I think that we really have a whole of layers of government approach to campaigning and cooperation with elected officials as well. So, you know, whether or not it turns out this in 2025 is the moment that we do return to representation in the Senate, it will be a question of when, not if. And I've done everything I can to make 2025 the year that happens. But, you know, we're operating in a political environment where other parties have a shelf life. You know, Clive will eventually, you know, he won't run out of money, but he might, you know, have one too many hamburgers and, you know, the worst might happen. He might have JD Vance visit instead of Tucker Carlson, and that might be the end of him. And, you know, Pauline and Malcolm Roberts are both in their 70s. You know, we're not a personality-dominated party. We're not a patronage-dominated party. We're a principle-dominated party.
You hosted a Freedom Minor Party conference in February this year, which what has come out of it is that there is a joint ticket in New South Wales with your lead Senate candidate, Craig Kelly, sharing the ticket with Jared Rennick's People First and the Heart Party, which is the new Informed Medical Options Party. And Jared Rennick in Queensland is running a joint ticket with the Katter's Australian Party. But obviously, it's so close to an election, nobody was really going to sort of give much at this election. Though I did notice last night in the debate on the opposition podcast that there was this, well, I heard from Bernie Finn, there's some openness to talk after this election, particularly as the polls seem to be suggesting that the Liberal Party will suffer one of their worst defeats, and it'll really be a crisis for them.
Yeah, so at that Freedom Summit that we held, that you talked about, one of the agreements at that summit was that we would meet again at the end of June following the federal election. Now, Family First didn't participate in that summit, and we now know why, because they basically intended to do a deal with the Liberal Party in the Senate, which was one of the items that the summit agreed, that the participants in the summit and the Australia First Alliance would preference other freedom minor parties before the majors. Obviously, Family First wasn't prepared to agree to that because we now see that they, in fact, have preferenced the Liberals number 2 in the Victorian Senate. But basically, we're always happy to continue conversations. You know, Bernie and his party, although Lyle, unfortunately, is not a person who is very suited to cooperation. He is quite a disagreeable person. And, you know, libertarians are fairly notorious for being disagreeable. So when I sort of describe someone that way, it's obviously at a fairly high level of disagreeableness. But it's my hope, you know, 2 years ago, shortly after the 2022 federal election, I was, along with Bob Day, former Family First senator, as Family First was before, we're trying to create a formal coalition ticket agreement all across the country in each state. You know, it would be my hope to make serious inroads into that, particularly if we find ourselves in a position where, you know, I actually joined Jared Rennick this morning on the Other Side program Damien Khoury runs. So Jared Rennick and Rob McMullen from Trump the Patriots and myself had another debate, a Senate debate that was recorded and will be published in the coming days, I imagine. And one of the things Jared Rennick said in Queensland is that with the Liberal vote going so badly and potentially even looking at losing seats in Queensland to the Labor Party, it may be that an additional Labor seat in the Senate is in play, depending on where Labor's primary is in Queensland. So, you know, we should not be assuming that either Malcolm Roberts or Jared Rennick or a Libertarian in Queensland will gain a Senate seat. There is a world where potentially the major parties or even a minor left party take that seat. So, I hope that isn't the outcome. But if it does happen, then it was completely avoidable, because if we had organised and if we had cooperation, particularly from One Nation, Gerard can kind of be forgiven because he was trying to salvage his position with the Liberal Party, so he didn't start making his run until later. But One Nation, James Ashby told me in a phone call that, "Oh, Jordan, your idea sounds really good. We wish you luck with it, but One Nation's not a minor party anymore." And I feel as though those words may ring in his ears in the next week or two. But I'm committed to ongoing attempts to cooperate, and I think that in the long run, even though each party is different and individual, and Gerard Rennick and I agree on a lot. Gerard's very bright and he's quite a smart policy mind and intellect, and he and I get on quite well personally and have disagree. Like when we disagree, it's quite vigorous but very measured and based in policy, and sort of reasonable minds can disagree. But I would certainly think we would be able to work together very well in the Senate if he was elected and I was elected. And I think there'd be much in common. And the idea of a freedom caucus within the crossbench, like more formal cooperation, I just can't see why we've got good people acting independently of each other and not actually being more organised and disciplined, because that's where the left really win a lot of the time.
What I think will happen with the Queensland Senate is that Malcolm Roberts will be easily re-elected, and sadly Gerard Rennick will fall quite short in the same way that Fraser Anning did with his minor party in 2019. And after Gerard is not re-elected, then obviously that will be the end of People First. But I don't think he'll vacate politics, but it'd be interesting to see what the follow-up meeting after the election can bring.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I have had conversations with people from People First in Victoria who have said Gerard's made commitments to help them register state parties or whatever, and maybe the party survives him. Who knows?
I was hoping to speak to Chris Neal, the People First candidate in Victoria, but now that I've said that Gerard's got hardly any hope of getting re-elected, I'm not sure he'll agree now.
You've got a very an audience not very receptive to libertarian ideas, it would seem, in the comments. They're quite skeptical.
Oh, well, that's why I've got you on. There's still a lot of people watching. You're the most watched of the interviews so far. So
yeah, well, look, I can only put my best foot forward. And look, at the end of the day, I think if you're in Victoria, and obviously not everyone watching this will be, but if you are, you should be considering not only policy, not only ideological alignment, but what someone who is elected to the Senate is going to do with that term. Because as Tim already said, the most likely outcome is that we have another 3 years of Albanese, and the lessons that the Liberal Party government are going to take from that is not what you think they will or should. They have shown that they are completely constitutionally incapable of adopting a principled approach to campaigning and to shoring up their base. They stand for nothing, so they'll fall for anything. And the people who are in the background behind Dutton, the moderate Liberal Party backbench, are far worse. Your Angus Taylors, your Susan Lays, they are not the best and brightest. Dutton is someone we'll miss, I suspect, in the not too distant future.
Do you think he could lose his seat?
I do. I think that Dixon potentially is losable. I think they've been sort of downplaying that and saying, "Oh, it's not going to happen." But I think that they're playing with fire, and Dutton's distracted. Sitting incumbent MPs are very uniquely vulnerable to those kind of challenges. We saw that with Tony Abbott, and I just think that what the Liberal Party will be after this loss is they will be a party that says, "Oh, we need to become more moderate. We need to become less principled. We need to become more weather vane."
Yeah, that's what I think.
That's what they will do. And I can tell you, because I've been inside that beast, they will not learn the lessons that they should learn, and they can't be fixed. They can't be made better. They have to be replaced. That wasn't what I started with. I started this campaign thinking, I'm going to make the Liberal Party better. I'm going to drag them towards, a principled position.
I think we're we're all surprised at just how bad this Liberal campaign is. I mean, the
But
slogan
it's not just
is...
the campaign, Tim. It's not just the campaign. It's actually Dutton. It's his performance. Like, I
Oh,
realise...
nobody thought he would be this bad during the campaign.
Yeah. And it's not until I've seen the last couple of weeks play out that I've realised how much he has avoided the media, how much he's avoided, one-on-one interviews with hostile or competent journalists. Like, he really has been operating in this rarefied air that Albanese's actions in 2024 allowed him to operate in. It was extremely unusual to have a prime minister whose missteps and kind of bad instincts or whatever in terms of governing actually created this space where an opposition leader could become the favourite to win without really doing anything. And as soon as the ALP campaign machine kicked in, and as soon as Dutton had to be in a room with journalists who weren't just going to give him a cakewalk and had to be opposite Albanese, he actually makes Albanese look vigorous and young. It's bizarre. Like, when you see them side by side, Albanese's performing well. And I don't want to say that. Like, I don't at all.
I agree. He had a shocking campaign in 2022, and so people assumed that he'd be shocking in this campaign. But the only misstep that he's really had is the misstep off the stage.
Yeah, that's right. And it's funny because I don't know why. And this is the thing. All he would have had to do, and it would have humanized him, I think it would have won him votes if he had said, oh, look, I took a tumble, off to the glue factory for me or something. If he had have had the self-deprecation and the sort of quickness to, make a concession and say, oh, look, I made a mistake, what a goose kind of thing. Australians love that. You know what I mean? Like, that's the sort of, that self-deprecating, humanizing vulnerability that, like, I just think that is something that politicians haven't drilled into them, that they can't make a mistake. But I think that is actually a sign of authenticity that people are hungry for. And that's just what the mainstream parties can't give. Like, they're such Frankenstein's monster packaged together machines.
Oh yeah, the talking points during
the debate, they cannot. And the irony of it is that the ALP have been accusing Dutton of being Trump, but Dutton can't be Trump because Trump was anti-elite, and Dutton is so hopelessly elite and incapable of being authentic and having long-form conversations and reaching out to the forgotten, rusted-on, blue-collar Labor votes in the high-no vote areas that we're actually reaching out to and targeting very effectively. He just can't do that because they don't trust him, and I don't think they should.
You're a ex-Liberal, Craig Kelly, who's running for the Libertarians in New South Wales, was a Liberal MP. John Ruddick he tried to reform the Liberal Party with no such success. Campbell Newman, the former Queensland LNP Premier, ran for the then Liberal Democrats in the 2022 federal election. Ross Cameron, a former Liberal MP, is the New South Wales Libertarian Party president. And watching this campaign, none of you would regret leaving, where the Liberal Party's fiscal responsibility, the commitment to small government is just out the window. Peter Dutton here's signature policy is just the temporary cut to the fuel excise. So I know what the Libertarian policy is.
Well, that's right, but he's also opposed income tax cuts. Like, before the Parliament finished, I would never have thought that in a million years, that we would have a Liberal government campaigning on higher income tax. Like, it boggles the mind. Like, and the other thing too is it's not just the policy, it's the execution and it's the lack of seriousness. Like, this is a campaign where people are hurting. Like, we've got mass migration, we've got housing crisis, we've got cost of living, high energy costs. People are getting smashed. Like, out there in the real world, people are struggling, like, really hard. They're in pain. And these clowns are just not actually taking it seriously. They're not acknowledging the problems because they can't, because as soon as they acknowledge the problems, their whole globalist worldview falls apart. And they're actually making light of it. Like, the Liberals have been releasing these AI nightmare fuel ads, that are just absolute.
The Muppet Prime Minister.
Oh, but not just that, but like, there was this one on the fuel excise where it was like completely AI, aliens fueling up jet fighters and all this sort of stuff. It's like, I just want to shake them and go, people are actually looking to you for an alternative so that their life isn't completely fucked. Like people are going to food banks, like middle-class working people here in Ballarat are going to food banks. We've got 1% rental vacancy. We've got years backlog. Like I'm working in construction litigation before I went to full-time campaigning, and we're seeing people not even able to build because there's so many blowouts and delays. There's slabs unfinished, framing stages unfinished because builders are going insolvent. Like things are bad, really bad. And the only people actually providing answers to those, or the only people asking those questions and providing answers to those questions are the Victorian Socialists and the NSN. And I understand that there'll be people in this chat that might be very sympathetic to some of the NSN's answers to those questions. I'm not, but they're asking questions that need to be asked. And the majors aren't asking them. And the Libertarians are also asking them and are providing different, more positive solutions.
The Libertarian Party slogan is the cost of government crisis, which I think is completely accurate about what Australians are suffering under. I'm not sure how it's going to resonate. That's won't know until election night. But you mentioned that how can more houses be built when there is all of this red tape, paperwork, all of these approvals that need to be made. The fact that, like, also going to energy as well, the amount remember the 2019 federal election over the Adani coal mine in central North Queensland. They'd been planning that for 10 years. And I sort of wonder who would want to be a property developer or wanting to be a miner, jumping through all of these hoops for years and years on end.
Yeah, absolutely. And even investment capital. Like I've got friends who work in investment capital, and the moment you say the word Victoria, they bail. It's a sovereign risk issue. Like, and Australia will follow very soon if we don't make changes at the federal level. Like, you know, the fact that, and this is another thing, and not to go back to Dutton too much, but like, the one kind of like golden thread that actually made me think they were worth voting for over Labor was the nuclear energy policy. And then it's just completely been abandoned. Like
it hasn't been abandoned.
No, it hasn't been abandoned, but he gave one good answer in response to it in the second leaders debate. And I thought, where the hell has that been? But they've realized.
Yeah, that was in the Channel 9 one. That was excellent.
Yeah, and I thought, why isn't he saying this? And it's because they've basically accepted the focus groups that women don't like nuclear energy. Like, that's the reason. I guarantee you, like, as in I know people in the Liberal Party campaign machine who have told me that's the reason, that women are uncomfortable with nuclear energy, so say their focus groups. And they've just accepted that. The problem with the modern Liberal Party is they just allow the left to set the definition and to frame the debate. You know, they are so reactive and they're so
And that's why they don't do anything while they're in government either.
No. And you know, like with the ABC thing that got run in Kooyong, and they were putting all these policy positions to us, to Amelia Hamer and Jane Hume as attack vectors, and they were saying, the Libertarians have all these extreme policies. That's not in alignment with the Liberals' policies, is it? And that's not what the people of Kooyong want. And the Liberals should have said, yes, that is in alignment with our policy principles because we have the same principles. But instead, they're just getting dragged towards this teal, you know, amorphous blob, vacuous soup, and it's just slop, and they're just going to get decimated every election until they work out that people don't just want more of the same. And I think that, you know, if I'm elected, I can see the work will need to begin almost immediately. Day one after the Senate is confirmed, we need to start the work for 2028. We need to be putting in the work to find candidates, to get fundraising, to win lower house seats, because the Liberal Party need to be, put down, essentially.
Like I said before, I think that unless there's a miraculous turnaround in the next week, we haven't seen it coming in the previous weeks of the campaign, then it's going to be not just a loss, but it's going to be just an identity crisis for the Liberal Party. And it's they've gone like I said, they've gone a long way from like their slogan of well, what they say on the Liberal Party's website's still good.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. But that's just hidden under an ever further layer of, like at the end of the day, you've got a scenario now where the Liberal Party are just jumping at every shadow, and the electorate stopped listening. Like in the end, it doesn't matter what Dutton says now, because firstly, you've already had 1 million or more people vote already. So a lot of people aren't going to hear anything he says, even if they were listening. And secondly, I just think people were looking for something different. They haven't heard it, and now they don't trust what he's going to say, because he's also backflipped on things he has said. So yeah, look, I think that we really need to be planning for the second term of an Albanese government, unfortunately, and that makes the voting choices in the Senate all the more important.
So Rosanna up here has said, wow, more crap Australia is going down like England if Albo and the Greens get back in. You haven't said anything about stopping immigration. Why? Now, what is the Libertarian policy on immigration? It's quite difficult for some people to understand. So
that's okay. Look, in really, really simple terms, we propose a cap on migration that is 1% of existing population intake, less your outtake, which we think would actually fall under libertarian policies. You're looking at a net overseas migration figure of about 60,000 to 100,000 a year. Now, how we determine who makes up that intake is very different to other policies that other minor right parties have out there, and that's through what's called a migration fee. So that migration fee will basically be set by monthly auction, and the auction price that's determined for that month will basically have the people who want to come and be permanent residents in Australia pay that migration fee. Now, that migration fee, we estimate, would be basically likely around about $100,000, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. And that represents the upfront cost of the impact of that migrant on the existing infrastructure and the existing society. So we're making sure that we're front loading the cost of migration at the beginning. And if you look at Donald Trump in America, his gold card scheme, he's already raising massive amounts of funds in the Australian.
So it's also there's a lot of Australians who wouldn't like that, because that millionaires can simply buy a place in a country, and
well, we'd rather
then also be allowed to buy housing as well.
Well, I think we'd much rather people coming here who are able to support themselves, who aren't, the other side of this is that the migration fee system, when it comes to genuine skills gaps, because it would actually make companies who might be saying now, when there's no cost to them from the government just generating this pool of random immigration labour, that they say, oh, there's a skills gap. But in reality, if they had to pay the migration fee for their employees that they were basically recruiting overseas, they would be thinking much more carefully about whether there is a skills gap. If the cost was $100,000 to bring a qualified nuclear engineer in the event that we had nuclear energy as per the libertarian policy, then employers would be thinking, well, are we going to actually maybe invest that money in local training and infrastructure to make sure that we're developing local talent, actually filling and preempting skills gaps to make sure that we're giving opportunities to Australian workers? Or are we going to pay the price of a skilled migrant intake? So it's actually introducing real skin in the game, a real choice. And where people are actually coming here to work as skilled workers, it is a much more of a sponsorship relationship where the business is actually paying for their migration fee, vouching for them, and you've got someone actually coming into employment for a skills gap that really exists, that an employer values and is going to pay quite a lot of money for, rather than just have this pool of competing skilled workers just being basically distributed wherever the government thinks is right. So this policy that we've got, it is more complicated. We're not going to walk away from that, but it's a complicated problem. And the issue with just saying we're going to pause, freeze, slash, is that the wheel always turns. The right of politics is terrible at designing systems and solutions that anticipate them not being in power forever. You know, I saw it and you saw it with Howard. He just was governing as though you were going to just have, it was like end of history stuff. It was like basically this idea that there would never ever be a Labor government again. And of course there was. And everything Howard did laid the foundation for what our enemies did against us. So you had you had the Work Choices Act, which failed and was repealed and was replaced with the Fair Work Act, which used the exact same precedents that Howard had put in place to basically have a federal takeover of enterprise bargaining and the unions. So the right wing of politics basically have this view that, we're going to get in and we're going to put good people in charge of the bureaucracy. We're going to have a good policy and then it's going to fix the problem. And guess what? It might for a year or two. And we saw with COVID, we had migration completely frozen. And it did help in some ways. But as soon as that ended, then you had a Labor government completely overcorrecting and making it as though it was basically a non-event. It's as though it never happened. So you need to actually develop a system that survives the change of governments, that can't be undermined and torpedoed by bad faith public servants. And our policy was actually costed by the Productivity Commission in 2016 and considered quite seriously. And one of the reasons it didn't get accepted, the Productivity Commission report said that it would be politically difficult to sell, essentially, to the Australian public. And if that was true in 2016, I don't think it's true in 2025.
And these skilled workers, migrants who are being sponsored, pay the migration tariff, does that put them on a pathway to citizenship? Because at the moment, skilled migration and being an international student, it's a foot in the door on a pathway to permanent residency and citizenship. That's why
so this was an interesting thing that came out of the debate last night that you might have, I don't know if you noticed or watched it with Warren Pickering. So our policy on citizenship is actually harsher than One Nation's. One Nation has a policy of 8 years before citizenship. We have 10. So the Libertarian Party says that you shouldn't be able to be a citizen until you have been a permanent resident with a clean criminal record and being a productive member of society for 10 years, at which point you get access to welfare. So we say no welfare until citizenship, no citizenship for 10 years. So we think Australian citizenship is something that should be valued and be a holy grail to work towards, not something that's just given out like candy to anyone that's here for 5 seconds, because we are a great place to live. We do have a lot of benefits that are afforded to citizens. And the welfare state needs to be restricted. It needs to be for citizens only. So, I think this myth or this sort of idea that, libertarians are open borders, libertarians, immigration, whatever, I think that is a trope that, you can carry on with it and you can say it, but it's not true. And our policy is a policy that would make a real difference to the lives and quality of life for Australians. And it's actually a policy that would likely be accepted for different reasons by the Labor and Liberal Party. It could be sold to them. Whereas the kind of policies that our competitors are putting forward wouldn't be implemented until you have a complete takeover of government by one of those parties. And even then, only as long as they kept that control. Now, one other thing that should be noted about this immigration policy is that we would also be withdrawing from the UN, withdrawing from treaties like the UN Refugee Convention. We would replace this kind of, we're going to take, 1,000 people from Gaza at short notice in the middle of a war zone without doing proper, anti-terrorism checks and police checks. And that would be replaced by the migration fee as well. If someone in the community in Australia, like a church group or a philanthropic organisation, feels like they want to help asylum seekers and people in war-torn parts of the world, they can pay the migration fee and sponsor that migrant or that refugee. They can have responsibility for taking care of them in the community, and they can be basically held accountable and have skin in the game. The migrant is both better off because the asylum seeker actually has a infrastructure that has sponsored them and will support them, and the community is better off because they in turn will be actually taking responsibility for and having skin in the game for an asylum seeker, where at the moment, nobody wins. We're not setting people up for success. And it's this kind of nobody, it's not anybody's problem in particular, so it's nobody's problem. And then, of course, becomes everybody's problem.
Well, libertarians also oppose war, which creates lots of refugees as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, on foreign policy and foreign affairs, we say that, an Australia First policy should be adopted. I'm running for the Senate in Victoria. As far as I'm concerned, Australian taxpayer funds are often misspent and disastrously applied here in Australia, where we can see where they're being spent. I don't think the government gains any special wisdom when it gives Australian taxpayer funds to foreign countries or in foreign war zones or to foreign governments. And I think that we should just be basically having a blanket policy of no foreign aid to war zones, no military aid, and a far, far more restricted version of what is in Australia's national interest, both from a foreign aid and from a defence point of view.
Now, while Peter Dutton and the Liberals recoil from mentioning that they're going to cut any taxes or spending, the Libertarians just they just don't not only want to cut tax and spending, but want to slash it. I don't have a toy chainsaw with me, but I do have a prop Halloween knife. It's completely fake, so it's not real. Though
yeah, well, I mean, if it's more than 20 centimeters in Victoria, it's now a machete. So
it's plastic. So, although I remember John Stossel when he was talking about government cuts, he had a real meat cleaver on the set of Fox Business. But no, so yeah, what are you going to cut?
Yeah, so look, the size of government is far too large. To begin with, we would be looking at the E-Safety Commission. We'd be looking at the ABC. If they do give me a right of reply, I didn't quite go full Karen, but I did certainly write them a strongly worded letter about their editorial charter yesterday. So we'll see if they give me a right of reply. I'll just say defund the ABC, and they'll have to publish it, which would be great. They'll probably just get back to me after the election, I suspect. But basically, a lot of Australians don't appreciate how fat and bloated our government, and not just the government directly, but that outer second and third ring of consultants of NDIS, it's all just become so bloated that we really could cut a massive amount from the public service and from the government, and people wouldn't notice any difference in their lives except that it would fund tax cuts where they'd have more money in their pockets. So, nothing is off the agenda. Nothing is sacred. We'd be putting efficiency dividends on the public service, 10% cuts to start with. Now, funnily enough, the Labor government in Victoria have actually implemented more than 10% cuts to the public service. So they've actually exceeded our policies. But again, they haven't done it for the right reasons. They've done it because they've got no cash. But I think that the best way, and actually I just see a question there, how do we take down the ABC? If you look at the BBC in the UK, they've moved to almost like an opt-out subscription model.
Oh, you can't opt out in the UK from paying the license fee. You get your door beaten down.
Right. Okay. So they've turned it into a license fee in effect.
Oh, it's always been that way, the license fee. And
but we would say that should be on an optional subscription basis. So essentially that model of transitioning, so there would basically be a period of time where you would say, okay, there's a 12-month cool-off period where everyone's paying this fee for the ABC. The ABC has to do a great job during that 12 months to convince everyone they should still be paying the fee. And then after that 12 months, anyone that wants to basically get rid of it can, and the ABC then has to do whatever it can with what's left. So that would be introducing real competition, real incentive for the ABC to deliver value programming and be fair and impartial, which obviously they have big struggles with doing, as they've shown in the last couple of days with our party.
You also, how was it being in the same studio as Raph Epstein for the minor party debate there? Because Raph Epstein, he is a rubber bullets denier that Victoria Police ever shot COVID protesters with rubber bullets. Apparently it didn't happen, even though there's video. There's protesters who have the scars.
Yeah, look, Raph is a raging lefty. He pushed back on a number of things we said, but I think that I acquitted myself well given that. But that's the bread and butter for the ABC. They can't even see their own bias because they are so biased. But there are many opportunities to make really sweeping systemic cuts, not just window dressing where we're saying, okay, we're going to, fiddle with this and, temporarily suspend this. No, we need to be abolishing, repealing, slashing. And that kind of system shock will cause shockwaves and will really, be a big issue. But I'm confident that the good people in the Australian public service will find productive jobs in the private workforce.
And you've had a few election stunts by showing how the cost of government crisis can be lowered through the no excise petrol, which you want to be permanent, not just 1 year, half 1 year, and see how we go. And also alcohol and tobacco. Would you just bring it back to 10% GST? The New South Wales Police didn't like your tax-free VB.
I know, that was bizarre. I really don't know what possible issue they could have had. We thought at first that it might have been like one reason, for example, we haven't done excise cutting stunts in the pub is because there's actually promotional pricing laws and restrictions in New South Wales and Victoria around. You can't have happy hours that go too low and all this sort of rubbish. It's absolute nanny state, isn't it?
Yeah,
so that's the reason we never did it in a pub per se, which would be actually great and would be much more visually.
You can just add that to the list of regulations that'll go.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But when it's actually talking about drive-through bottle shops, which is where the highest excise is anyway, I really don't know what the New South Wales Police could have possibly wanted there. We could only reason that because it was saying cut the cost of government. They might have been saying it was hate speech. We don't know. Look, at the end of the day, we believe excise is an extremely regressive tax. It has all sorts of negative consequences. We're already seeing with tobacco excise.
And Peter Dutton and his law and order policy pledged more money to fight the tobacco wars. They're fully on board with it.
Peter Dutton, unfortunately, his instincts, he's just never met a law and order opportunity he didn't want to exploit.
Yeah,
whether it be anti-Semitism task forces off the back of fake caravan hoaxes, or whether it be trying to introduce bloody RICO predicates. Like, when I read that, I was like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? The RICO Act was used against Trump, as a political tool, to be one of the ways that the Democrat deep state was basically trying to harm his election campaign. These laws are designed for abuse. They're designed because the police find it too difficult to prosecute criminals and do their job and investigate. So they make the barriers lower, and all they have to do is basically say that someone's a member or a leader in an organization, and then they just charge them regardless of whether they can get evidence for a particular offense or not. So, I think I have very, very serious concerns. And one funny thing that you and your listeners might chuckle at is that in my travels, and I talk a lot about the tobacco excise and how we need to be slashing tobacco excise to get organised crime out of black market tobacco, is people say, no, don't, because they misunderstand and they think I'm trying to get them to pay the price that normal legal cigarettes are now. And they say, why would I buy government cigarettes? How glorious is it that in 2025, like, the average person on the street sees cheap black market cigarettes and government cigarettes? So it's really a no-brainer in terms of these excise taxes need to go. And our Senator David Leyonhjelm once said, thank you to smokers for the amount.
Yes, I remember that.
For the amount of tax revenue they contributed to the economy. I don't know if you can say that anymore because they're not really, the original estimate for this financial year's tobacco excise was $15 billion. It got revised down to initially, I think, 11 billion and then 9 billion. So it's just becoming fictional numbers because nobody's buying government cigarettes.
So who's the real addicts? It's the governments.
They're addicted to tax revenue. I wrote an op-ed for the Herald Sun saying that the government was addicted to tax revenue from tobacco, and they didn't publish it. They didn't want to. I don't know why. But
now the Libertarian Party also supports the legalization of cannabis, like the Legalized Cannabis Party, though Fiona Patten, when she was with the Sex Party, and then it was the Reason Party, I always hated her slogan, tax and regulate it like cigarettes and alcohol, like what we have now. That would make it more expensive than it is illicit.
Yeah, and you would still have black markets because that's what you've seen in California. Is they've got incredibly high taxes on marijuana, and you've still got raging black markets and the cartels. So, I think that you're right. Fiona has very bad instincts on some of these things. And I've had a couple of debates with her and seen her in person on a couple of issues. And we would say that Libertarians support smoking weed, vaping from a first principles issue. It's your body. It's your choice. You do what you like. The government, it shouldn't be any of the government's business what products you consume, as long as you're not harming anyone else. Yeah. So we say if you want weed without the woke, vote one Libertarian.
Though when it gets more contentious is what he's advocating for legalizing hard drugs, cocaine, heroin, ice. I mean, you're a former addict, so
yes.
you did it
when it
was illegal anyway.
Yeah, yes, of course. But and in some ways, like, I think that someone with my experiences advocating for a more treatment-based medical rather than criminal enforcement model for those harder drugs. Like I do support, and like I think the Libertarian Party position, it would be fairly support looking at drug issues for harder drugs as a medical rather than as a criminal issue. And I think that in reality, you have a world where prohibition has failed. Nobody who wants to use heroin or cocaine or ice, and I say this as someone who's trafficked drugs before, when I was trafficking for subsistence, like nobody who wants to do these things can't do them now. Nobody's not doing them because they're illegal. What is happening is that there is enrichment of organized crime through black market profits, and there's quality issues because they've got a monopoly market and they see law enforcement efforts as profit opportunities. So I think that we need to deal with the reality rather than the vibe and the feeling. Our moral indignation and judgment isn't going to change what's happening on the ground, and in fact, it's going to create a lot of other problems. I did see one question, and I'm just sort of like looking at the chat as we're talking as well. The statement that they're saying, I seem to be comfortable attacking, or persuasive when attacking Dutton. I certainly don't give Albo a free pass at all. I think
they are a bad government.
Of course, no, absolutely, and they don't deserve to be re-elected. Like Albo should lose. Like if it's just purely on merit, the Albanese government should not be re-elected.
The difference is, and I told this to Craig Kelly when I interviewed him, is that although they're a bad government, they're not dysfunctional like Rudd Gillard were. No.
So their dysfunction lies in their ideology, not in their actual governance. Like in the sense that they are carrying out their policies and they are administering a functioning government. That's true. But I think that the problem we're seeing here, and I know Jim Chalmers looks like this sort of friendly, sort of semi-silly, he does that whole schoolboy thing where he goes, oh, shucks, Jim Chalmers. He comes off, do you know what I mean? He comes off as quite like inoffensive, but he is actually very smart and very, very committed to, hard left Keynesian economics.
Dr. Jim Chalmers, he has a PhD in Paul Keating.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, he certainly doesn't hold a candle to Paul Keating in his competence, but, some of the Albanese government policies, like the Help to Buy scheme in particular, is incredibly insidious, and people need to understand how dangerous the idea that the government should own equity in your home.
Oh yeah, the government will own 40% of your home and you'll be happy.
Yeah. So they're talking about you have a 5% deposit, the government has 40%, and then the bank has 55%. So you're a minority shareholder with the bank and the government in your own home. And if you think about the housing crisis and you think about house prices, what's that going to do to government incentives to make house prices grow if they have a direct financial stake? If they literally have a property portfolio, the government...
Yeah, well, both Dutton and the housing minister, Claire O'Neill, have said they want house prices to still... Yeah.
Steady managed growth. I was like, the Libertarian Party is the only party in a housing crisis saying we want housing prices to be cheaper for everyone. Because what's happened with housing is you're getting caught in this web of resentment politics and envy politics where all these parties from the left and the right are trying to target who they think the worst winners are. I don't think people who own multiple homes should, get any cheaper houses, but new home buyers should, or we should have public housing instead of private housing. The solution is to make houses cheaper for all, so that whoever you are and whenever you're buying a home, houses are just cheaper. It boggles the mind that the effect of all of this stimulus, the effect of all, it's a three-tier problem, housing. You've got massive demand-side stimulus. That's both through uncontrolled, unsuitable mass migration settings and stimulus like first home buyers grant, bond guarantees, Help to Buy. All of this stuff just pump primes housing prices. Negative gearing in a more libertarian world, if we had our flat 20% income tax with the 50K threshold, negative gearing would be gone, right? Negative gearing is a stand-in just for the principle that you shouldn't be paying tax on your losses. But if your baseline tax was the 20% flat tax with no brackets, we say, negative gearing could go the way of the dodo. We'd abolish stamp duty, we'd abolish land tax and replace it with nothing. You shouldn't be constantly paying tax on something you own. Same thing with capital gains. But like with housing, you've got the demand supply intervention, demand side interventions. You've got the supply side interventions where, you know, government is making regulation so complex that the people in charge of regulating the regulation don't know what's legal and what's not. You know, people who are building inspectors, domestic builders, don't know how to make sure they're compliant with the steadily growing complexity of building.
That's why there's a huge compliance industry, which
absolutely
is not actually doing anything
the
productive.
Compliance industry benefits union adjacent work roles, and former union members, a lot of them become those compliance inspectors. And then the third thing that nobody talks about in housing is that the government is doing all these massive big build infrastructure projects that are CFMEU work sites where you're getting paid 3 times what you're getting paid to build a domestic home. So if you're an apprentice, why would you go and apprentice to a domestic builder? Or if you're a domestic builder, why would you build a domestic home when you could be earning 3 times the money building a government big build that's just going to get pushed out into the never never? Jacinta Allen, the Premier of Queensland, brags that she's going to have 3 generations of engineers and trades working on these projects. Like, she said that as if it's a good thing. So this three-way trifecta is just resulting in, like, it will eventually collapse. We're entering a stage where I think the government is soon going to, like, Victoria's going to ask for a bailout. I don't think the federal government can give it, but if they do, it's going to get really, really bad really quickly.
Yes, though in this federal election, there's not much talk about debt and deficit.
No, because that's very inconvenient, because they've all committed to tax and spend. And you know, when it comes to, you know, the reality, the very, very difficult reality is that in any market, and the housing market is a deeply, deeply regulated, deeply, deeply stimulated market, if you do remove those stimulus and if you do end up allowing housing prices to fall, it's like when Uber came in and the taxi licenses were eventually undone. The last people to buy taxi licenses were the worst losers. So it's the last person to buy into the Ponzi. That is always the person who's going to be harmed the most. We can't let that harm, and we can't let that managed or planned decline in homes prevent us from taking steps to avoid a wildly unplanned, hugely, hugely damaging and devastating implosion that will happen if we do nothing. So like saying what we do now will hurt is like saying, if I cut you now to bleed a wound, I can avoid amputating your arm later. Like, there will be pain. It just depends on where the pain lands and when, and we can control it. But if we wait until things are out of our control, then it's just going to unravel, and it's going to be serious, serious problems.
Like the Austrian economists behind me say, that there is this short-term pain in this reset. You could call it a great reset, but it means that once there's this short-term pain, the economy properly grows, productivity, there is things being produced, and actual living standards increase.
Yeah, and you can see that in Argentina at the moment. You know, like the worse the the harder the partying and the worse the hangover, the harsher the medicine's got to be, right? If you wait until a problem is so obvious that everyone can see it, it's almost impossible to fix. And the cost, like the damage and whiplash and shock ripples effects of the medicine that's needed are far, far worse for not taking steps earlier. Like, we're not at Argentina stage yet. We can avoid that kind of a crash and hyperinflation and all the negative problems that have happened. But we need governments who are going to recognise it as a problem and take hard steps now. Like, at the moment, renters are not quite in the majority. Once they become in the majority, eventually governments will start looking at the needs of renters and less at the needs of existing homeowners. But the Libertarian Party is ahead of that curve. We're saying, yes, it will be painful. Yes, it will be disruptive. But we can actually, as that comment said, you can manage and deflate a bubble rather than allow it to pop. That is absolutely the case.
Well, we're getting a bit sort of nerdy libertarian now, so I think we should we should wrap it up now. Thank you so much, Jordan, for your time tonight. It's a really busy campaign time, so I appreciate you making the time to speak to my audience.
And if I could finish and maybe just do a quick sort of summary to your audience of
go for it.
Why even if they don't consider themselves to be a libertarian or they're concerned about some of our ideas, why they should nevertheless vote for me. And it's because I am actually someone who is going to get in there and work hard and actually try to find solutions. The easiest thing in the world to be is a outrage merchant. Okay, it's everything is geared towards that. You know, the media rewards you, the algorithms on social media rewards you. It's a short-term cycle. You can just yell at the sky and old man yells at cloud, and everyone will feel good, but nothing will change. You know, we need somebody who's going to get in there, you know, work with alliances of convenience. A broken clock's right twice a day. If the Greens agree with a good policy for bad reasons, you vote with them. It shouldn't matter where the idea is coming from. And I feel like with One Nation and others, they get sucked into this tribalism that the Liberal Party kind of push, where, you know, you vote against an income tax cut if it's the Labor Party in an election. Like, it can't go on like this. And we need people who are going to roll up their sleeves, work hard, disrupt, and actually start to make the change. And libertarian solutions to these problems haven't been tried yet, and I think they're going to work.
They will work. They've been. I knew they would work in Argentina.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, that is actually one of the beauties of timing. And just after, so just before we changed our name, I had to drag the party kicking and screaming to this name. I fought bloody hard for it because I had to fight Les Hughes to do it, right? And no one wanted to do that at the time because it was a hard fight, and it was, as people would said it would be. But 2 months after we changed our name to the Libertarian Party, Javier Milei became the president of Argentina. And suddenly now in the world, everyone knows what a libertarian is. We don't have to answer that question of, well, show me somewhere it's worked with a shrug anymore. We know it works. And I plan on being in my own way and being true and authentic to myself to be Australia's Javier Milei.
And you've already had a bit of practice with the chainsaw at
yes.
the free speech rally last year, and will you be getting the chainsaw out this Saturday at the Freedom Rally?
Look, Morgan's got a pretty good sized one. We'll see how we go. I am also simultaneously trying to attend the Women Will Speak rally in the CBD.
Yes, there's. I can't be in two places at once, so we're probably going to, our Unshackled team are probably going to split up so we can cover both. But you'll have to make your way through to get to Women Will Speak, the trans TIFA. They might throw eggs again, like they did at the last Women Will Speak, or who knows what they could have this time. I don't want to give them any ideas, but make sure if you are attending, they're both at midday. Women Will Speak at noon at Victoria's Parliament steps. Wear earplugs, because one of their strategies, trans TIFA, is to just blast out music, noise. That shouldn't be necessary at the Freedom Rally, though it could get a bit, there could be a bit of jeering if is not in this. It was penciled in that Ralph Barbette, representing Trumpet of Patriots, was going to be there. He's not in this flyer. But that would have been interesting if he turned up, because there's a lot of people in the freedom movement not happy that he's preferencing Labor, Greens, Teals, and Jackie Lambie on various lower house seats, how to vote cards.
Yeah, it's been a pretty interesting time. I think I've said enough on that. I'm apparently living in their head rent-free, and some of their preferences were specifically designed to hurt libertarians who had been relentlessly attacking them. So I won't...
have you been called evil by Searle and Wrightson like One Nation has?
No, I haven't. I feel a bit left out.
Yeah.
There's still time.
Yeah, because that would be memorable.
That's right. Exactly. No worries. Look, thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for listening. And I, as a politician, with the past I've got, and policies that are controversial and not easy, if I couldn't accept a little bit of criticism and hard questioning, I'd be in the wrong job queue. So best of luck and stay safe, everyone. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll see you Saturday.
See you then.
Now, also occurring on the evening of Saturday, 26th of April, a day after Anzac Day, is the National Workers Alliance Event 5, Sacrifice. So you have to email the workers contact form on their workers.org.au/contact site. And now I won't be going to this because it's just going to be Matt Trahey speaking. So he tends to likes to talk for extended periods of time that's what I found when I covered his previous event with Damien Richardson, who is not going to be at this event. And of course, Matt has just gone viral for his interjection to the Friends of the ABC Kooyong event at Kew Library, where some old lady attempted to punch him, but Matt was able to block it. But that became quite a media frenzy today. And also Harrison McLean, the leader of Melbourne Freedom Rally, also tried to ask Monique Ryan at a refugee town hall about her husband taking signs, and she didn't say anything. The MC just said, "Oh, that's an irrelevant question." But Damien Richardson has been in the news. He had his first court appearance for his alleged Nazi salute at the second National Workers Alliance event. And so his lawyer, Peter Mongol, asked for his client's suburbs to be removed from documents as the actor's neighbour to try to shame him. Apparently, they're putting up signs saying that a Nazi lives here. Now, of course, Damien, all he did was just raise his arm to say, if I raise my arm this way, am I committing an offence? Well, Victoria Police decided that he was committing an offence. So he had his first court date this week. And now it's quite amazing that his neighbours have gone to so much effort treating him like he was a known pedophile, when all he did was just raise his arm at an event. But of course, now we have the federal legislation, which is 12-month mandatory minimum for raising your arm in a horizontal direction. As we say in soccer, your arm is in an unnatural position. Dude Pistol, what merchandise am I, or did you want Jordan to plug merchandise? And now, I'm not sure if many of you are aware that Michael Gray Griffith, the host of Cafe Locked Out, had a heart attack last week. He was in the ICU. He had to have a triple bypass surgery, which has been successful. He's only 58 years old. So that was quite concerning to his followers, but it looks like that he will make a full recovery, which is great. And also happy birthday to Richard Wollstonecroft, who turned 56 yesterday, when he I was back on Sam Newman's You Cannot Be Serious podcast, where thanks to all of your supportive comments in last week's YouTube video where he had a go at Richard, claiming you're just using me to promote your work and suggesting guests that get me written up in the newspaper. So Sam had to eat humble pie, and so read out all of the supportive comments. I thought that Richard was a bit too forgiving of Sam for his ambush of him, but yeah, Richard is prepared to move on and keep going on the show. So there'll be a fresh report from Tiger Mountain that'll be published on the Unshackled social media report from Tiger Mountain Facebook page this week. The last one was Richard's view on the Trump tariffs, which he's in support. I don't agree with. So as you would have, many people would have seen my interview with Jordan. I agreed with him on points where my audience, some of my audience wouldn't have agreed. I'm never been the type of host who just panders has a narrative to pander to an audience. I always have my own views, whether I don't know whether they might cop a backlash or not. Now, of course, with 9 days to go to the federal election, there will be an Unshackled election night live stream from 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time when the polls close on the East Coast. So I'll be joined by Stephen Berry of the Mr. Berry Show, formerly Trade Tasman Talk, and Kyle Kutazi, the ex-New South Wales Liberal Party State Executive member. And also I'll announce other panelists in the coming days. The Flano Philosopher says, how much bone marrow is stored in those drawers behind you, Timbo? What do you mean by that? Now I will be back on a RCR, Reality Check Radio New Zealand, on Paul Brennan's breakfast program this Monday morning to give an election update. And of course, I will be back that evening, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time, for the final Tim's News Explosion before the federal election, the final countdown. So that, of course, is on the WilmsFront channels. So remember that where you're watching, whether it's on YouTube, Rumble, replay on Odyssey, make sure you are subscribed, click the bell to allow for notifications, give a thumbs up and comment below. Even if you've been commenting in the live chat, leave a comment on the replay because it all helps with the algorithm. And even better yet, if you want to support not just my shows, but all Unshackled Productions, you can become a premium member over at the unshackled.net. So you can take out either a bronze membership, $5 per month, silver $10 per month, gold $25 per month, or platinum $50 per year, or take out a yearly membership, $50 per year, silver $100 per year, gold $250 per year, or platinum $500 per year. Or so the unshackled.net is where our articles and Unshackler awards are still published. And you can also support us over at Substack, where our Unshackled Productions archive is now, and also where I send out email alerts for upcoming Unshackled Productions. You can also get alerts if you're subscribed on Telegram, Gab, or Facebook. So monthly $5 per month, annual $50 per year, or founding member for $500 per year, or you can sign up for free to be on the mailing list so you get all of those alerts. So have a solemn Anzac Day tomorrow, however you commemorate it, lest we forget. And obviously the federal election campaign quite rightfully takes a break on that day. It is the 110th anniversary of the Anzacs landing at Gallipoli, and it will also be this year 80 years since, well, not to the day, but 80th anniversary of VP Day, Victory in the Pacific, where obviously that was the defeat of the Empire of Japan. And there's also VE Day as well, victory in Europe. But in World War II, the Anzacs, their primary battleground was the Pacific. I almost mispronounced specific there. So have a solemn Anzac Day, and certainly we'll be reflecting on both those anniversaries. And I might see some of you on Saturday for either the Melbourne Freedom Rally at Flagstaff Gardens from midday, or the Women Will Speak event at the steps of Parliament House at midday as well. Until then, stay safe, stay sane, stay free, stay optimistic, and remember, wait until election day to vote. Good night, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com to view the archive of episodes, and keep visiting the unshackled.net to view all our shows, and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.